Well, hello. This is Dr. Chris Lemmon. This is my chat for February. And so this year I'm talking about some of the crazy ideas and some of my movable background. Some of the crazy ideas that I kind of entertain. I don't particularly present them. In other words, I don't think I've ever done a class where I say, this is the way I think. I've always done classes where I would set up some exercises and we would then discover things. And that's kind of a theme that came out of my childhood. So before I go into my crazy ideas, so I don't sound crazier than I already am, um, I talk for a few seconds about childhood. I grew up in the 40s, and 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 so things were a little different in the world because I got pneumonia almost every year, several times. Uh, I usually wasn't allowed outside to play in the wintertime. So the kids in my neighborhood that were outside playing ball and stuff in the winter would be all dressed up and on a little bit drizzly day or anything that represents wintertime. I was pretty much in the basement playing by myself. So maybe that's just kind of like maybe it's an excuse, but pretty much it was kind of like I was in this world of imagination. Everything was me playing toys all by myself in a basement, which had a dirt floor and had linoleum laying on top of it. So it was fairly clean. I had a blanket down there I could kind of wrap up in when it got a little cold down there. And it was not particularly cold down there, but it was certainly was damp down there. The heater for the whole house was sitting down there. It put off a little bit of warmth. Mostly it went through the vents, but it did put off some warmth. So it was kind of cozy to speak of. So summertime, my grandmother would go to a church camp and we'd spend the summer at a church camp. So let me set the stage. The church camp was two rooms. We had a downstairs. We had a room, which was kitchen, dining room, living room. That's pretty much it. Not very big a room. And then upstairs was a bedroom, which was big enough for a bed. And that's pretty much it. There was no electricity. There was no running water. Um, and so it just means we had a coal stove and we had an ice box. So the iceman would come every other day. We would get a sliver of ice and he would slide it into the little channels inside the ice box that would keep this stuff cold. We had a dry sink, which means you had to bring a bucket of water in, dump it into the sink, wash dishes, put it under the sink and let it drain, and then take it out. So here, my grandmother was hauling these buckets of water. I had a smaller bucket, probably a gallon, and I would haul them and make multitudes of trips. So we had a pump somewhere on the grounds that we'd walk to. And the particular cabin bungalow that she had there were fourplexes. Um, the fourplexes were set up so um, that she picked a fourplex that was closer to where the outhouse and the shower room and the trash cans and the water pump and a place to sharpen your knives. Knives at the time didn't stay sharp as well as the new ones today. So it was kind of interesting. You had to constantly sharpen knives. And so as a kid, those are the things that I was kind of playing in and around of. There was areas for playgrounds where there were some slides and stuff, and there was kids in the area, and they were all in there playing, and they all kind of had their friends, and they were coming down there to camp on a regular basis. But I wasn't so much interested as a kid at 4 or 5 years old to be able to interact with them. I just wanted to go explore. It was like I was a kid in the basement. It's like I finally got out into the world. I just wondered. I just went out into the world. Now, what I saw around everybody is I saw little glowing lights. It just the energy around you. I just thought it was normal. I actually talked to other kids and they'd look and they go, "Oh yeah, I see that." Uh, Everybody was on board for that end of dialogue, but they would have no memory of it. I would see some phenomena with another kid on a hike. I'd see a tree. I'd see something move. I'd see a bird come over and land and just chirp and then look right in the eye, and we would just be chatting. And the other one would say, "Amazing, wow, it's almost like talking to you." But then later on, they wouldn't remember any of it happening. Like, wow, that's kind of interesting. We can't put that in there. So later on, when I was 6, I wrote, everything is united, everything is aglow, because of the fact that I saw those lights moving around. I watch people. We went to church on Wednesday and on Saturday and Sunday, and then sometimes on Saturday when there was special events. Which as a kid I just, sat there and whatever, didn't pay any attention. I was watching everyone else. I had my little fantasy games that I would play, and mostly watch the lights and watch the moves. I'd watch people talk, but then I watch the energy and I would talk to the lights and they would tell me a different story. So, if I would have told an adult at the time, they would have just thought I was mentally ill. And now today they certainly would think I'm mentally ill. Um, but anyway, that was my experience where it was. Let me give you two examples that were informative. At the first, I just talked to plants, animals, animals at first probably, and a few plants that were pretty. I'd see a plant that was attractive looking, a flower or something, and I go, wow, that's really cool. And then I'd see this little light come out of it, and I'd talk to it, and it would have usually one sentence, or maybe a couple of words. It would respond back. I could translate that. And sometimes I had to find a way to ask my grandmother what those words meant because I didn't know what the words meant. I was preschool, so I had no idea. But I would get these words and I would ask her, and I said, I heard someone saying that. What does that mean? I had to lie my way around it. Um, so yeah, that was the very nature of the experience for me. Was it was always a big adventure because I was seeing a lot more than the rest of the people. As a matter of fact, we would get out into the woods a little ways, and then usually whoever I'm hiking with would get a little bit scared, and they go, "Oh, I think we should go back. We're going too far away." So we'd have to turn around and go back. So I enjoyed going out there by myself. And I found by the time I was 5, I found all I had to do was lie. Right. My grandmother said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going with my friends for a hike." But there was no friends to go with me. I just went. And then I could go for 4, 5, 6 hours and come back. And and she would just be busy doing whatever. It was a lot of work, what you can imagine. I mean, you have kerosene lamps, you got to haul water, you got to cook things, you got to. It just was a lot of work. But anyway, she was busy, and I was on an adventure. Um, I went to every city back then had a dump. Well, they still do, but now they haul it to one you don't see. But every city had a dump. We had a dump down by the church camp, and there was a pretty good sized church camp. And there was a dump in there. And I know that I was not allowed to go into the dump. Nobody was because of rats, right? And you could see the rats in there. So it was like, it wasn't encouraging to go. And the rats were not very friendly. I'd see the rats and I'd see a little energy from them. And it just like was like, go away, right? Like they just weren't very social. And I saw in that dump a chair. To me, it was like regal is the word I would say. It would be kind of like what a king would sit on, but I wouldn't have had an idea what a king was. This is way before television, right? And it's a way before I had any pictures. I mean, it's before Dr. Seuss. Come on, give me a break. It's way back, right? So so there was no. I just looked at the chair and I go, it's amazing. I just had this image in my head that a king could sit on a chair. That would be something. So it was kind of a fancy chair someone had brought down to that church camp, and they had it in their cabin, and it broke, and they threw it in a dump, and it was busted, no doubt about it. And I'm looking at it, and I'm talking to this chair. This is the first time I ever talked to anything that was manufactured. Everything else I saw was in nature, a tree, a branch, a flower, an animal. They were there. And I'm talking to a piece of trash in a dump. So it's a good thing that nobody was there. And I'm saying to it, it's like, what are you like? I'm fantasizing just phenomenal, whatever. And once again, I've never been to the movies. I've never had any. I just totally picking something up in the fantasy of the world, and and here all of a sudden I see this light float up out of it, kind of flickering, and it floats above it. And I said, "Oh, wow, there's a light. It got a light in it. Oh my goodness." And I said, "What do you do?" And it said, "I hold form." I had no idea exactly what form meant. So I had to go form, form. I had to say that all the way back. I had to say the word form, form from my head. And then I had to find a way to ask my grandmother what form meant. Um, so I got it in my head. I reckon that's like, wow, some energy just holds it. It was a piece of trash. It had no function, no future. It was just going to rot in there and rain in the winter. It's just going to That's it. And the rats would run over it because there was nothing edible. But what it did do at one point in time was it held form. It's like, wow. So I was sitting in a world to where all of a sudden it seemed like there was communication going on, not like human communication, because all us kids pretty much got ignored back in the 40s and the 50s. It's kind of like you didn't talk to adults, or you had to be careful talking to adults. We'd have experiences, and it always had to be kind of secretive. And so we didn't get to share, and there was no intermingling with games. There was no television. There was no none of that stuff, right? The only time you were with adults is when you went to a church. Um, Pretty much in my hometown, if you went out to dinner, it was a bar. You went, they had a bar in there, and no kids were allowed at the bar. So then there were some tables, so then adults could go in and sit at the tables with the kids and get food, but there was no restaurants, at least when I was very little. By the time I was 8 or 9 years old, there was one or two restaurants that popped up in town that we could actually go in and sit at. And I do remember when you sat there, it was pretty much an ashtray in the center, and everybody had a coffee cup because the first thing they do is take my coffee cup away from me, which I didn't want anyhow, and they'd bring me a glass of milk, which I couldn't drink. So it just sat there because I had a reaction to milk. And everybody would be smoking, and the whole thing would be full of smoke. So it was not something that I desired to ever participate in any way. Anyway, I'm just setting a scene, all right? So here I am having this experience, seeing these lights, seeing these movements, watching the movements between people when they're talking. They look like they're indifferent, but you can see the energy was a little more flirtatious and a little more, whatever their sexual fantasies or whatever they were going through, that's kind of what was going on. And I could see that with them, although I didn't have any idea what it was. And and I could see this one day I was out just walking around not too far from our bungalow, and there were quite a few, 20, 30 of the bungalows at fourplexes. And one that winter had burned down. So there was just uh, um, the size of a bungalow, 4 rooms wide, 2 stories. It was all burned down. It was all ash, and they had rope tied around to keep people from going in there. This is before yellow tape, so it was just a rope. Um, and and I was walking by, and I was just looking at it because I was just kind of curious. It had like the bed frame from upstairs where the bed was. It was falling down, and it was all burnt and twisted. It was just curious. I was just looking at it. And I'm standing there, and I could see what was in ours and in all of them was the ice chest. The ice chest sat on the floor, and it had a door in front, and it had, like I said, in the inside it had metal in the inside, and you'd take a sliver of ice that the iceman would cut, and he'd slide it into those channels to keep the stuff cold. And at the bottom it would have a drain, and the drain had a copper tubing that went down and hooked up where it went into the floor and went under the floor somewhere to drain the water out. And that was an ice chest. So I'm looking at it there, and it's sitting like it's in its place. Everything else is all burnt, fallen down, but I guess because of that tubing or whatever in the back, it stayed in place. And the door was closed on it. It had a latch door on it. And I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden I hear a scream. And I'm looking around trying to see where the scream's coming from. I thought I could get a direction. I'm listening again. I hear the scream again. It's coming from that debris. So I know I'm not supposed to go in there, but I said, hell with it. So I went under the rope and I went on in, and I opened that door on that ice chest. And now I'm standing in ashes, debris, everything. I climb over stuff. I open that door. I'm going to open that door. There's a little girl in there that might have been like 3 years old. A little girl in there. She looks up, her eyes pop wide open. She lets out a belt of a scream. She comes flying out of there and takes off running. I go, wow, that was a trip. And I'm looking at the ice chest, and I thought, God, uh, I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? Because, it's not like we had a conversation about this whole event. It's like, wow. So I thought, well, I better tell my grandmother, so I better make up a story between now and back to the house. So I went back to my grandmother, and I said, hey, I was out walking. I heard somebody screaming. It was coming out of the ice chest. So I went and opened the door, and this little girl came out, and she ran. So my grandmother's lit up, and she said, you're not supposed to go in there. I said, I know, but I heard this girl screaming. Why don't you come get me? I was afraid that she was hurt. So I wanted to go investigate. she says, "Come with me." So I'm dragging by the arm, and we go down to the office, and she reports it to the office. But I loved it because she covered me. She said, "My grandson and I were out walking, and we heard a scream, and I sent him in there to open a door because I couldn't get in there with all the debris around, and a little girl came out." Like, wow. That was kind of interesting. I felt really proud that I got supported in my adventure. Um, I did finally, at first, the little girl was terrified of me. You know, if I saw her somewhere on the ground, she kind of like shriveled back. But next, she was pretty much with her sister. Her sister was in charge of guarding her after her uh, wayward adventure. Um, but it's just, I watched all this stuff go on and all this energy flow. And then finally we'd always go to the prayer healers. And my grandmother would go to the ones that would come to our church camp. But then this prayer healer would go to other places. Now, the cities were not very far apart. So she would actually then, on a weekend, get in the car and with someone, my mother or my aunt would come down and they would drive her to the next city, which be 15, 20 minutes away, and watch the same prayer healer do more healing. And we were watching him and he would lay on hands and I'd see all this energy flow into him and bam, and it would slap the person with an energy jolt. And it's like, oh, wow. Um, and I had watched this energy healer heal a girl that was a little bit older than I was. She might have been 7 or 8 years old, definitely someone who'd been to school, and heal this girl. And she had an eye problem, and and I saw that at our camp. So she would obviously come to that camp, that church camp, to get the healing. And then a week later, we went to this other city, and I'm seeing him do healings, same routine, right? But I noticed that girl was there and she was getting healing again. And I noticed some of the other people that had crutches, they'd kind of go up and they'd throw their crutches down and they'd get a healing. And then a week later, you'd see them at the next building getting a healing again. Uh, so I just figured it was a scam, but I didn't have a word for scam. So it's just like, so I could sneak around and I got a chance to go talk to that girl. And I said, I saw you like a week or so ago and when you got a healing, and you could all of a sudden see and all what was on your eyes had gone away. She said, yeah, it lasted about a week and then it just went away. It's like, wow. And so I come and get another one. It's like amazing. I'm hoping that after I get a few of these, it'll just be permanent. I just get to where everything is blurry and I can't see. It's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. So I said, do you know this guy? She says, no, but my parents bring me around to all the events when he's somewhere in the area. She lived in a neighboring city. And so it's like, wow. So they had all this faith in this, all this belief in it. I thought, that's very interesting. So as I'm trying to put my ideas together, I don't have a problem with the idea that there's some God out there that created this whole thing because that was pretty much what everybody at the time was the idea at the time, and so it's traditional concepts, right? And everywhere you go, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I looked at that and I said, well, why would somebody create this game and then have all these people sick and have all this chaos going on and not have any memory and have experiences you couldn't recall and like how would they create why are they creating us so stupid? What is this almighty God that's creating us so dumb? It's like so I am thinking, there's got to be a bigger piece to this. It's got to be something else. So that became my adventure in life to find something else. And pretty much everything that I was running into that was coming into age in the 60s, um, you know, mind controls and all this new age thinking, all this stuff was just kind of getting its grounds into the play of it. And I had got involved in karate and was teaching beginning kids in karate. And from them, I got involved in some yoga classes, and then I became a yoga teacher. And I was I was kind of steeping in all these things, rebirthing, everything that come down the pike. I was jumping into, playing with it for a little while and just reading the energy. Uh, I just got in that habit of looking at it and seeing the energy. And instead of talk to them, I would talk to the energy. I would start to see what it's saying. So So it's just you can call it an intuitive piece, you can call whatever, but I find that when I had a crowd of people around me, it was very, very difficult to do. And if I started sharing it, it's like this interaction would be very intense. I didn't have a lot of what I would call today ownership on it, but it was my gig, right? And that's what I was doing. So I was trying to think of an idea or some concept, which uh, eventually got me interested in electronics. And electronic gear was kind of like that energy that moves. Like, wow, this is really cool, right? It's like, wow, I like this. So when I went to college, I signed up and had to become an electronic engineer because that's what I thought. Wow, maybe that all that seeing that energy move was a way to get more information about the movement of energy. That was my whole scam, right? And that was kind of where my interest was starting to develop. Um, what I found is that I wasn't getting I wasn't getting any conversation out of the little electronic tubes and all the stuff that we were working there. It was like very, very different. And then I was running out and having all these experiences that I would see. Um, I did do like a lot of the kids, even by the time I was in school and in high school, they were had radios, they were listening to music. I never wanted a radio. I never had any interest in that. I just simply wanted to go on those adventures. I wanted to go out and see that. I'd sit and watch people work because I could see that energy kind of get into a focus and come into them, and they kind of keep breathing that into their body as they were working, shoveling, whatever. I kind of enjoyed playing like that. It's like, wow, what's going on? Trying to get an idea like, what is that dynamic? And so that's been somewhere in the back of my head as a goal all my life growing up. Is like, what's going on? What's going on? Of course, once again, I found lots of people that were willing to say, this is what it all means. You know, that religious thing is all wrong. This is what it means. This is what it means. This is the truth of it. This is like, you know, 3,000 years ago they figured it out and they forgot about it. And so here's the truth. And we just found it, unearthed it, and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't see any integrity in all in that. And when I mean integrity, I'm not saying I thought the person was lying. I just didn't see that the story and their energy was the same as the story they were presenting. So that's my idea of integrity, the way I put it. So I'm not sure they were lying because you remember I noticed that all everybody I was around with would see these things, they wouldn't remember them. If we'd have a conversation for a while, they would remember the event. They wouldn't remember always the energy communication. That just didn't. At the time, we talked about it, but the next day, pretty much gone. And by the end of the week, they wouldn't remember any of it happening. So it's like, wow. So it doesn't store in data. Like, yes. So I started doing more and more research and I got involved. And then chaos theory came out. And I'm looking at chaos theory and I says, okay, this is what we need. We don't need to personalize anything for creation. As a matter of fact, I don't see a much reason to be on this planet. You look at our history and we make the same stupid mistakes over and over again. We have the same animosity. We have the same from the tribal time forward. I mean, it's like we've been doing this for a long time. We just don't like those people, so we kill them. We do this. We treat them badly. We whatever. It's like it to me in school, looking at all this history and everything, it seemed like we were just simply redundant, which we pretty much are. It was hard to see how much we had developed. And because it's so small, it's hard to see how much we developed. I remember I had this experience, the kids not remembering the day after we had some profound whatever, and the next day they didn't remember it. As I started getting into all these other systems of playing with energy, um, I had a couple that were really kind of cool that I met. They would do this little thing. They would turn out all the lights in their living room. We'd have maybe 10, 12 people. And they had a box that was open on one side. And they would sit the box on a table. And so you could see inside the box. It had a top and three sides that was open. And it was sitting on a table. And you would sit in there and then they would turn the lights out. And everybody was sitting in their chair. And then he would start his little incantation, whatever that was that he read, developed, bought from someone, I don't know. And all of a sudden, a glowing face would appear inside the box. And then you could ask the questions to the glowing face and it would answer you questions. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. This is kind of what I've been doing all my life, except I didn't need a glowing face. The guy was kind of creepy looking. So I went there a couple of times with him. And of course, they were all like, we got the answers. So this is what's going to happen. And it was almost like fortune telling. The whole matrix of fortune telling. It's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. So he's getting a message from this, but he's believing it. And I'm thinking it's just like a conversation with a person. You have a conversation with a person, and sometimes what they tell you is not particularly true, right? Stories are not always completely true. My stories weren't always completely true. And as a kid, as a matter of fact, I had to lie a lot to keep from getting in trouble. So I don't think their stories are always true. And I have found that they weren't always true, right? Like, wow, that's kind of interesting. So this dialoguing back and forth started to interest me. So I switched from electronic engineering, which all of a sudden I realized is like, I did an intern program. I thought, no, I don't want to be an engineer. It's like this, too boring. And I switched to psychology, and that gave me a chance to dialogue with people and to be able to look at why they couldn't kind of get the conflict between an idea that I could kind of see, but they didn't have a dialogue to support it. They didn't have anything going on in their life to support it. So it was interesting. I really was. I was kind of fascinated with this whole thing, and I played with it for many, many years. I started saying, well, then what's the God thing? So when chaos, like I just said, came out, then I started looking at chaos theory and I thought, wow, uh, if you just had energy, just energy. Now, can you remember? I'm already a junior year in electronic engineering, and I'm switching to psychology. So if you just had energy, and and the energy was at a none location and no time, it would have no dimension, right? So you just had a pool of energy, and each piece of energy would not be moving. There'd be no movement. There would only be potential. That's chaos. So here's some energy, chaotic, but I don't have a location. I'm demonstrating as a location, but it wouldn't have one. Here's some energy. It wouldn't have a location, but I'm demonstrating it. So all of these energies that would be in a chaotic system with no time, no space, does that seem far-fetched? If you look at an electron is moving, has no mass, so it has no time. So it moves, from our perspective, it moves for eternity. It just moves for eternity. Wow, that's interesting. So all this energy would simply be there, but it would not be moving. There's two things that I got out of this. Number one piece of energy, because of its proximity to another piece of energy, starts to influence it. Now I'm a psychologist, and it's like, okay, influence, I get that. And it's starting to influence that, and it creates bifurcation. That is a place where we have all of a sudden an influence for direction. In other words, a potential for movement, a choice in a world with no choice, but imagine choice. It's like, wow, that's interesting. So I've already started to like this chaos theory. It's like, wow, no location, no references, just streams of potential. Wow. So what if, because we're highly influential, we influence each other, we're telling the truth, we're telling a lie, we influence each other. I actually went into through my psychology, I actually went into law enforcement trying to get into criminology. Um, that path didn't work. I tried working with kids. That path didn't work. I wound up just working in business and working with HR departments and then startups. That's what I wound up doing with my education. But but when I looked at this, always kind of seeing, wow, if this is just a potential, and we just have, if I am just here in this game, and all this game is an imagination influenced by everything else, like, wow. Now we look at this and we think, okay, I can feel this table in front of me. I can see this. I can see the light in the computer. I can see me in the computer. I wish I could see all you guys, but I've got all this going on. It's like, wow, all this seems pretty real, but then we recognize that, come on, Einstein said really there's probably no mass. And now in Geneva, we're able to prove that there is no mass. So it means that this is all pretty much an illusion. Yeah, we can't get our head around it, and we could read that in a book, and tomorrow we wouldn't remember it. Like I said, some of these things just don't fit into our structure because of our structure is a design piece. It's a design piece to be able to remember what we need to remember to interact in this energy game, to have an influence upon. Uh, we're literally all dancing together, all influencing one another. We're not doing a very good job of it, but we're still learning. I mean, it seems like thousands of years we would have learned something, but apparently we're slow learners. Uh, so maybe in another couple thousand years. But when I start to look at that, I start to say, wow, that starts to explain the idea of evolution. If things are evolving, that means that as we evolve, we become aware of. Got to be careful here because in the world of energy, in the world of creation, becoming aware of means you're creating it. What if we're not discovering new stuff? What if we're actually just in a process that we're going through of exploring, we're actually creating? What if we're sharing in the idea of creating this as an experience and the influence of energy upon another energy that has no space and time? But when we all of a sudden fantasize it, we put it together, we then put it into a window, right? Come on, you guys have had enough dreams. You wake up in the morning and you really think you're there. Sometimes now I am so old, that automatic thing that cuts your body movement off when you're dreaming. So dreaming is like when you look at the brain scan, it looks like you're doing something. So the only difference between you doing something and dream is that it cuts your body movement off. So your body's turned off and you're just dreaming it. That's pretty much happened. Yeah. Now today, when a woman is pregnant and the baby's kicking, she says, "Oh, the baby's awake." Well, no, it's probably not awake. It's probably dreaming. Is what it's doing, and it's moving. And so when babies are very, very small in that first year, it takes a little while for that cutoff to come in. And so they see them wiggling around and moving around when they're sleeping. That's because they're dreaming. That's a dream cycle. Then later on, they learn to do this. And by the time we get to be my age, sometimes that goes away. So, my wife was always on guard. It's like, you just stay over there. If you start dreaming, you're moving around, your arms are moving around, you're kicking around. Like, what? Yeah, okay. So time me down tonight. Uh, anyway, that's just the nature of it. I start to look at that and I thought, wow, if this all flows from a chaotic system that would have no space and no location. Now, that already takes our logical, rational mind out of the game. Okay, so would we have to look at this anymore? No, we wouldn't have to look at it anymore. Is it giving us directions? If it would be giving us directions, it would be the evolving piece. In other words, can the influence continue? Why do we see all this mass and all this? We see all this because, according to science, because everything slows down for it. When we talk about the speed of light, what we're saying really at the speed of light, distance disappears. In other words, at the speed of light, nothing would be moving. Right? To go here from here to the edge of the universe at the speed of light means you would collapse all that down. There would be nothing. So the reason we have the experience we have is because everything is moving so slow. Right? But if you have an imagined idea and then you get a piece of paper out and you're going to write a story, you're adding details and you're embracing it and you're putting, so you're in the moment now, influencing the story to build the details of it. That's why I like to read. It's like, wow, look what they did with an idea and they just embellished on that idea and put this whole package idea together. Like, wow, well, that's interesting. Are we doing that? I'm not saying that we need to start a new belief system. I'm not saying we need to do anything. I'm saying that the reason here I am over 80 years old and I'm now saying this is because I never said it before because I don't think it's worth saying. It's just a theory. It's just a thought. And if I put the thought out to people, then people would say, well, you're wrong. This is what's going on. It's like I have talked to the Buddha or whatever. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that when you start to look at that, they all have a limited story to it. They all have a limited package. They're all like there are holes in all those theories. And when you come back and you have something that has no space, no time, no reference, just energy, and all that energy influencing other energy would not make a movement, would make a potential for movement. The energy I was starting to see was the energy of a potential. Like, wow, that's what was talking to me. Yes, it wasn't really talking to me. What it was doing was feeding my fantasy. It was feeding my fantasy because it said, imagine this way. We call that an influence, right? Uh, Come on, if a salesperson comes to sell you something at your house and is talking to you, they're trying to influence you. And so that's what that energy does. We we basically are a group of people living on this planet influencing each other in some way, shape, or form. Come on, we just went through an election. Guys, politics, it's like tons of influence. Right? We just went through a crazy pandemic. That's like tons of influence, right? And we're sitting there, as we always have in the past, dig into history. What everybody always questioned the fact of. We go back and we say they're lying to us. Well, go all the way back in history and we find that's been happening all along. You know, Teddy Roosevelt was one that all these pictures of charging up the mountain, but he would show up, charge up the mountain, they'd take a picture, and then he'd go back. I mean, all of it. I'm not saying it was a lie. I'm saying it was good advertising. It was very beneficial to bring people together. If we had a function of uniting, then that's what we've been trying to do since tribal days. We've been trying to unite the people together. It's just that we reach a threshold and then all of a sudden you reach that threshold and then you look and it's like, wow, there's still more people. Why aren't they all joining my theory? Well, they're not all joining your theory because they've got their own theory. And maybe their own theory is better and maybe it's not as good. But they've lived it all their life. Hey, it works for them. Come on, we're only here for a snippet of time. And if really we were slowed down from the speed of time to what we're moving at right now, Jesus, this so far, this whole span of life on planet Earth would not even be a, a sprinkle of one little photon of light at the speed of light because it would be stationary and all that could be encapsulated into just one little piece. Like, really, how much data is there when 90 some percent of it is redundant? So, redundant pieces just redecorated and back into play again, right? Redecorated and back into play again. And so that's the nature of the game. So this is my theory that I've had probably since I was maybe, I don't know, 30 years old and played with it. When I started working with people and playing with the world of intuition, why I would see these movements, I would talk to them a little bit, I would see what's going on. Now today I start to realize that what I'm talking to is that track that you have, those memories, those experiences. Actually, if I attend to it, my attention is a movement of energy producing an influence, and then you're influencing me back. I have done thousands and thousands of intuitive readings down through the years, just counseling service. There's another name for it. And I'm sitting here looking at someone, and I could start to say, okay, um, I'm not sure you're telling the truth, but I'm not sure that you're lying either. I, I'm sure that you're telling me a story. Part of it is true and part of it's not true. But the part that you're completely sold on the whole thing. But if we go into a little bit of a trance and we tone down, and we start to have what we call a matching picture, a life experience I had that you had. And so, come on, we're all humans on the planet. We have similar life experiences. We have parents. We went to church. We did this. We did that. Whatever. So there's similar life experiences, but it was a little unique. And then your experience with that experience, your interaction with that experience is unique. So I would look at someone. I'd say, "Wow, they're sitting there telling me a story." I had a girl one time come to me, and she's all of a sudden she got very, very fearful of anything that by a window. So here she was, maybe about 19 or 20 years old. She could drive a car at night, but she was scared all the time. If she was sitting in a car, she couldn't sit by a window. She had to slide somewhere in the middle of the back or middle of the front. She just couldn't sit by a window. In today's cars, she would have a hard time, but those days they had bench seats. Um, she wouldn't sit by a window in a house. If you're in a restaurant, she wouldn't sit by a window. And so she was afraid. She had a story. She said that when she was young and maybe like 15, 16 years old, she was in taking a shower and some of her brother's friends were hanging around and they were trying to peer in at her through the little window that's in the shower and it was open a little bit to vent it. That's before fans and showers. So that was her story. She said she saw a face up there, and so ever since then she's been afraid of it. But that's just the story, right? So I can remember getting her into a trance, taking her down into a trance, and looking at her, and I'm going like, wow, that's kind of interesting. I could see her turn her head looking up, and there's a face right there, and she's looking at her face, and that's all I got. So I bring her out of trance. We go have a cup of coffee. We take a little break, and then we come back in and sit down. And I said, "Let me describe a face to you." And I described the face, and she just froze. She just was like catatonic for a minute. And I said, "Who was that face?" And she said, "That was my neighbor." And I said, "Oh, and you were a preschooler?" "Yes." And all of a sudden it's coming back now. This took 2.5 hours of dialogue, right? But all of a sudden she remembered that they were playing hide and seek. And there was a hedge between her family's house and the neighbor's house. And she would get into the hedge. And inside the hedge, she could then see everyone else, but nobody could see her. The neighbors saw her going into the hedge, and the neighbors think in his mind, these kids are playing in my hedge and they're going to break up my hedge. So he's all pissed about it. So he comes on, he sticks his head into the hedge right above her. She's down in there hiding and said, "Get out of my hedge or I'll tell your mother." She ran out of that hedge, took off running, and that was the beginning of the fair. So when she got older, all of a sudden that became more intense. Everything develops. All the influences that influence her life growing up also influence the dream, the threat, the fear, the imagined piece. They all can develop. They can all grow up. They can all mature with you. And so here she was with this face. And so I described the face and we had conversations and we played with a little bit of being able to move the face out, reduce the size, shuffle it around. And so it just gave her all of a sudden some control over that face. Within a month or so, she could sit next to a window, no problem. Never became a problem ever again. That she had a few other issues in there that I didn't get to address. But in that process, other behavioral issues that she had that I'm not going to go into details now, but for the most part, those also changed too. Um, what I what I started to understand, at least a little bit, the idea of the unconscious and subconscious pictures is that the subconscious picture, which she had in the bottom, that sat in there, it was really a subconscious picture because there was a story that we finally got to. There was layers and layers and layers of stories on top. Each one of those stories influenced her and her behavior in life. When we got all the way down to this particular picture, the guy putting his head in there and getting her, it kind of took a couple of months, maybe 6 months. It wiped out all that stack on top of her. So all the other behavior things that she did was a little bit unusual for a young lady her age, all of a sudden just went away. And not only that, talked to her a year later. She didn't remember any of them. Just like, oh, I never went out for track. I said, I remember you showing me the trophies. She said, I don't have any trophies. I said, I believe you don't have any trophies, but talk to your family. I think they'll remember it. And she did get back to me. She said, that's kind of funny. I can't remember. I talked to my family. I did have trophies. Not unusual. I've seen this hundreds of times. It's like, wow, I guess I just threw them all away. Yeah, I think you just threw them all away. It's like you didn't want to remember certain aspects of what happened. All these became a catalyst for action. And you go all the way back and you take this out. Now, somewhere below that in the subset, there was probably most certainly a very much an unconscious movement pattern. Um, I didn't get that. I don't think I got that completely out. So years later, I saw her again, and she still had a little strange vision of herself, not very realistic, that was maybe only 3 or 4 or 5% of the trauma she was going through. But most certainly there was still a little tweak in there. I could feel it. Um, but it's like I don't know if I could have got to it or not. It would have taken that takes a lot of time and a lot of dialogue. And there was no reason for her to make those changes. She just had this little princess idea about who she was and her righteousness and and so it's like, wow, okay, that's kind of intriguing. Um, anyway, there are deeper sets of patterns. So when I throw this all out to you guys and say, hey, here's a crazy idea. I'm not advocating that anybody join. I have never, ever in teaching for 20 years, I have never tossed any of these ideas out to people. People would always ask me what I thought, and I go, yeah, whatever. Doesn't matter. Still don't think it matters. I don't think it makes any difference. Um, but this is the way I start to, this is why I like scientific pieces, not because they're correct, but all of a sudden we have a scientific piece, then it falls into our logical structure and we can dialogue and then we can remember it. They teach us mathematics, they teach us language, they teach us language so we can read a book. We read the word, we get the idea associated, we learn that it's a database in there. So we can then understand what's written on a piece of on a book or a piece of paper, and we can put that all together and we could communicate with that. I really think what we need is uniting forces. We need to come together more. I see evolution as trying to do that. It's going to take thousands of years. It goes in layers, right? It develops a little bit, it develops a little more, it develops a little more. It just knocks the pieces down. It slowly has the potential of taking more and more barriers out of the way. So after being 80 years on this planet, I can tell you that a lot of the barriers are out of the way. I have seen things that I could not even begin to. I can remember going through the South, and as a kid, we were on a trip. So my parents would stop and let me go play in a park. We'd see a park along the road. We'd stop, we'd get out, and I'd play there for a half an hour. I'd go on the swings. I'd do with that. I'd play with the kids there or whatever. And I was going to the fountain to get a drink of water. And my mother ran over and grabbed me and said, "You can't use that fountain." And I go, "Huh?" She said, "You can't use that fountain. I saw the other kids using it. Why can't I use that fountain?" She said, "I know it doesn't make any sense, but that's the rules here." So we were from Pennsylvania. Like, I didn't know anything about that. This is Mississippi. Really? Yeah, she had to take me over to the fountain I could use. Like, because that fountain is for colored people and this is for white people. And I'm kind of like, this doesn't make any sense in my head, right? It's like, wow. Oh, uh, those are the things. It's like, wow, just it's amazing. I just was in a state of shock. Of course, you got to California, and I didn't see any of that in California, so I thought, yeah, it was just a nightmare. And until I got older, and I found like, God, that kind of thing really goes on. It's amazing. You start to see we have changed. Really, we have changed. When I talk to people my age that grew up, for example, in the South, and they were born in the 40s, and they have a whole total different view of this, and they're struggling to be able to justify what all occurred. And they're sitting there and they're trying to think, God, was my history and all the things I believed in true and my family believed in true? Or is it really some other way? It's always going to be some other way. It's always going to change. It needs to evolve. It needs to become uniting. That's the whole piece. We need to get people to come in and say, I don't want you to think like me. I just want you to show up and not ostracize me and separate, to be able to think your own way. What is unique to you? You think however you want to. I don't care. We can sit down and make it work better for you. I don't have a problem with that, but you don't have to think my way to make it work better. My way is just my way, not necessarily a truth, not necessarily reality. I don't think we need any of those. Those are the things that create the barriers. So that's why I never taught it. But anyway, I had promised that I would do these talks and throw out these crazy ideas, and I will do that for the next few. And I just gave you a little background of where, possibility is that some of the variables in there got me to the place of thinking that particular way. Uh, I wasn't, I didn't have someone tell me a story saying, this is the truth, believe this. I just didn't pay attention to anybody saying anything. I was out there being the adventurer, finding out whatever I found out. And I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to sell what I experienced as the truth. It was just my experience. That's all it was. But it has allowed me at least to communicate with other people and not throw a judgment into the mix of it. Not that I don't get judgmental occasionally, most certainly, I could get nitpicky on wines and food and people with attitudes, but I most certainly don't want to go kill them, right? So we really we need to we need to get past that animosity as a group of people and become planetary. All right, so I talked long enough. Thank you very much. This has been fun, and I will talk to you next month with some other crazy ideas.